So, thank you for being here. Today's talk is about the Anapanasati Sutta. In essence, that means the discourse on mindfulness of breathing. And what I'd like to do today is just look at this discourse and point out the 16 steps of mindfulness. The 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing that lead to liberation, basically, lead to freedom, lead to knowledge and waking up. I first had contact with Anapanasati many years ago. I think when I first began being interested in Theravadan Buddhism, which is a long time ago, 1975, 1976, that time. And I learned mindfulness of breathing. Well, at least I thought I learned mindfulness of breathing. What I was learning was, in fact, sections of what the Buddha expounded in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. And over the years, I've practiced many retreats, and sometimes I've focused a whole retreat on just one aspect of mindfulness of breathing and what I've seen in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. So only relatively recently have I learned how to combine all these practices into one practice, which is pretty profound. For me, it was really profound, actually. And I could see I could do this combination because I'd spent many years practicing the various sections of this practice. And I can also see that when I follow the full practice as a practice, it gives me the possibility to wake up, basically. That's it. When we practice according to the instructions and we manage to realize what the instructions are pointing to, eventually we reach the end goal, or the end realization, I suppose I should say, which is waking up, being free from dukkha. So to give you an idea of this sutta, I want to set the scene. And of course, as you know, most of the suttas were, all the suttas actually, come from, I'll say most of them because they're not all related to what the Buddha spoke about. They're not all given by the Buddha, but most of them are. In the time of the Buddha, he would give a talk, somebody would remember it, and then it would be transmitted through chanting. Like the person who would remember it would say, "Thus I have heard," and it would be remembered as a chant, and it would be kind of saved in that respect, transmitted in that respect through chanting. And it was only about 400 years after the Buddha's passing did they start to put these chants, these suttas, to print. And what we have is a whole numbers of volumes of the suttas. And here's one example. These are the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. That's just one volume, and there's quite a few. There's I won't go into all the details about the volumes of the suttas, but usually the way the suttas begin is something like "Thus I have heard," and so that was in many cases Ananda, who was the Buddha's right-hand attendant. His attendant, and he had a very good memory. He would remember what the Buddha said, and then he would chant it, and so he would begin it by, "Thus I have heard. This is what the Buddha said." So setting the scene of this particular sutta, it was given at the end of a 4-month retreat. And the Buddha was abiding in Savatthi in the eastern monastery of the palace of Megara's mother. And he was abiding there during the rains. In northern India, there's something called the rains retreat. Generally, the monastics used to wander and be homeless in that respect. They used to find a place and meditate there for a while and move on. When it came to the rainy season, they would stay put for 3 months. So at this time there was a rains retreat, and the Buddha was abiding in this rains retreat, and together with a number of very respected and elder disciples. And after 3 months, he said, this is pretty cool. Actually, I can read you what he said. He said something like, he wasn't barking like my dog is barking. He was saying something else. Because I'm content with this progress. My mind is content with this progress. So arouse still more energy to attain the unattained, to achieve the unachieved, to realize the unrealized. I shall wait here at Savatthi for the Kamudi full moon of the 4th month. In other words, after 3 months, he said, this is pretty cool. People are practicing well here. And there were a number of people were getting enlightened, and people were gaining expertise or skills with the various meditations. And the Buddha said, this is very good. Let's do another month here. So they did another month. And this particular discourse, this discourse on mindfulness of breathing, was given at the end of that 4-month retreat. So it wasn't necessarily instructions for how people should retreat. It was just, it wasn't just, but it was highlighting 16 steps that one can find enlightenment or wake up using mindfulness of breathing. And mindfulness of breathing was the Buddha's preferred meditation practice. It was one of the practices he used on the night of his awakening. And when sometimes he would just go off and do a retreat. There was a month-long retreat. He just went off and said, I'm just going on a retreat. I don't want to see anybody. I'm just going to do a retreat. And when he came out of the retreat, he was fed, and he'd see people on the every second week for the chanting of the discipline when they'd have a meeting. But other than that, he just stayed on retreat. It was his preferred abiding. When he came out of that retreat, that was a month long, he said, if anybody asks what I've been doing for the last month, you can tell them that the Buddha's been practicing mindfulness of breathing. So it was the Buddha's preferred meditation practice. It was the practice that he was enlightened with. And it was a significant practice for many people. So after this 4-month retreat, many of the bhikkhus, I'll call them bhikkhus, but we can relate them. Bhikkhus are usually the name for a male monastic. But if I use the word bhikkhu with you, I'm referring to one who meditates, one who practices, whether they be male, female, or non-gender specific. A bhikkhu is one who is practicing here. So if I ever say bhikkhus in this, when I'm talking about the sutras, that's what I mean. So he was presenting it to a range of people who were quite accomplished and skilled with their various meditation practices. And he wasn't saying this is the only way you can do mindfulness of breath. He was saying this is one way that I do mindfulness of breath, and it leads to awakening, and there are 16 steps to it. So as I mentioned earlier, a set of 4 is called a tetrad. So there's 4 tetrads in this, and in this process. And each tetrad, interestingly, relates to one of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. You've probably heard me talk. Well, that's what the last retreat was about, almost completely about. We practiced along following the sutta of the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the establishments of mindfulness sutta, and we went over mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind or heart-mind, and mindfulness of phenomena. So what we have in these 4 tetrads is mindfulness of breathing as it relates to the body. Mindfulness of breathing. The second tetrad is mindfulness of breathing as it relates to the feelings, which are hedonic quality of pleasantness or unpleasantness or neither. They're so important in the practice that the Buddha designated a whole domain of mindfulness around them. Then we have mindfulness of citta, which is translated as heart-mind, which generally relates to states of mind, what we would call emotions sometimes, states of mind, moods, mental phenomena, and so on, that are either inclining towards greed, ignorance, and hatred, or their opposites, as well as states of mind that are quite liberated, like a concentrated mind, or states of mind such as the divine state, the divine abodes, as well as liberated states of mind. So when he's talking about these 4 tetrads, he's relating these 4 establishments of mindfulness to each tetrad. So the first tetrad, body; second tetrad, related to feelings; third tetrad related to mind, or citta. Sometimes it's understood as consciousness. And the fourth tetrad related to the Dharma Nupassana Satipatthana, which is dharmas, meaning phenomena. And in particular, in this one, he relates it to the 7 factors of awakening. When we talked about Satipatthana, or the 4 establishments of mindfulness, it was quite challenging, I think. The 4 Satipatthana are designed to help us see the reality of things. And in the 4 Satipatthana, in the Vedana component, in other words, the second establishment of mindfulness, which is about feelings, we take a lot of time looking at dukkha Vedana, or the feelings of unpleasant feelings. We also take a lot of time, spend some time looking at pleasant feelings, and sometimes looking at neither pleasant or unpleasant feelings. So there's 3 feeling types. And we distinguish between worldly and unworldly, as I mentioned last night, as well as on the retreat. But so in Satipatthana, we're spending a lot of time looking at unpleasant feelings, and we're challenging ourselves sometimes. We're looking at the nature of impermanence in terms of looking at our mortality of our body, for example. So the Satipatthana Sutta, in terms of feelings, focuses on dukkha and pleasant and unpleasant. With the Anapanasati Sutta, however, the mindfulness of breathing sutta, there's in that second tetrad, which is about feelings, it just focuses on pleasant feelings. So isn't that cool? Now, that's really interesting. And when it comes to the 4th tetrad, or throughout the whole of the process, actually, in the Satipatthana practice, there's 5 subdomains in that domain of Dharma Nupassana. Well, that 4th Satipatthana, that 4th establishment of mindfulness, there's 5 subdomains, and the two subdomains we focus a lot on are the subdomains of working with the hindrances and working with the 7 factors of awakening. So, in the Anapanasati Sutta, there's just the focus on the 7 factors of awakening. It is an assumption that we already know how to deal with the hindrances. Does that make sense? So we're not working on them. We're not bringing them up as a particular project that we work through. It's an assumption that we're able to seclude ourselves from the five hindrances. So this anapanasati, in comparison to satipatthana, or the four establishments of mindfulness, is more advanced. It's a more advanced practice. And it's not sort of so much going into the suffering of experience, and it's not completely focused on insight. If we're talking about insight and serenity, we talked about the differences between the insight approach and a serenity approach, and these two aspects to meditation. Satipatthana, or the establishments of mindfulness, pretty fully focuses on the development of insight. It's mostly insight. However, what we have in the Anapanasati Sutta and the mindfulness of breathing practices is definitely an emphasis on both insight and serenity practices, or tranquility practices. And in fact, the first tetrad, which is focusing on body, is mostly about relaxing. The second tetrad, which is about feelings, is about tuning into pleasant experiences, joy and happiness, which are related to, and also calming mental activities. And I'll go through the whole steps in a little while. The first tetrad is about body, and it's focusing on relaxing the body. Second tetrad is about joy, is about happiness, is about calming, being aware of mental activity, not physical activity, mental activity, and being able to calm it. So that's really, really interesting. Now, coming back to the sutta as a whole, actually I might get a picture up, and I might get a table up and show you. Yeah, I'll do that. So I'm just going to share my screen and show you something. Can you see my screen, everyone? Lisa, can you see it? Oh. Trying to shift this across. Can you see that, Lisa? Okay, so, beg pardon? You okay? I can't straighten it out. I took a photograph of this. Is out of Analio's book on instructions on mindfulness of breathing. What we have here is 16 steps, and overlaid with that are the four areas which relate to Satipatthana as well. So body, feeling, tone, mind, and dharmas. And over here, on this other side, we have the seven factors of awakening. So throughout mindfulness of breathing, we're connecting with mindfulness of four areas, like we do with Satipatthana, as well as integrating, and sometimes it's just implied and sometimes it's more overt, this connection with the seven factors of awakening. So we have mindfulness, investigation of dharmas and energy related to body in that first tetrad. Then we have joy and tranquility related to the second tetrad. Then we have concentration and equipoise, which I'll explain in a little while about the third tetrad. And then we have something that's a little bit, this is what happens after the seven factors of awakening. It's these final steps in awakening. Dependence on seclusion, being free from dog barks, for example. Being dependent on seclusion, we have dispassion, independence on dispassion. We have cessation, and cessation leads to letting go. So I just thought I'd show you that so you can have that as a picture in your mind. Okay, so you got that? So setting the scene, I've set the scene. Then I've talked briefly about the way these steps relate. I'm going to now go through the actual practice in 16 steps, and I'm going to do this by reading or referring to a kind of a summary and a synthesis of the sutta. And it usually begins with something like this: here gone to a forest, or to a root of a tree, or to an empty hut, one sits down. In other words, one has some physical seclusion. They're not saying go to the busy marketplace or, try mindfulness in daily life practices. They're talking about literally putting yourself in a quiet space. Say a place free from helicopters and aeroplanes flying overhead. But if you can't avoid that, you just have to deal with it. Or free from barking dogs outside your hut. But, if a dog starts to bark, well, so be it, you work with it. But you've chosen your spot. And having folded the legs crosswise, keeping body erect, and having established mindfulness to the fore, in other words, like what we did this morning, you establish your posture, you create your posture, ensure that it's upright, relaxed, etc. Then you establish mindfulness. You bring mindfulness in front of you. You get a taste of what mindfulness is like. And we've talked about mindfulness many times. It is this presence. Whatever mindfulness means for you, for me it means presence and clearly comprehending something, being with something, tracking some experience, turning towards experience. So you establish mindfulness to the full and you get the flavor of it. Mindful one breathes in and mindful one breathes out. Breathing in long, one understands, I breathe in long. Breathing out long, one understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, one understands, I breathe in short. Breathing out short, one understands, I breathe out short. One trains, experiencing the whole body, I shall breathe in. One trains, experiencing the whole body, I shall breathe out. One trains, calming bodily activity, I shall breathe in. One trains, calming bodily activity, I shall breathe out. So I'm just going to unpack that a little bit. When we're talking about establishing mindfulness, we're looking at the first factor of awakening. Primarily, we're establishing mindfulness. Then what we do is we begin to go into that second factor of awakening with exercising discernment or curiosity, exercising some kind of inquiry into what's happening here. And as you remember, I invited you to focus on the breathing. It doesn't have to, whatever way you experience the breathing. Sometimes people experience their breathing in their body, or the whole body, or just the nose tip, or sometimes they've got an image of it. Whatever way you experience the breathing, you're present for it and you're inquiring into it. He talks about here inquiring into whether it's long or short. I mean, it's kind of a little bit, it's more that when you inquire into it, you start to step on that factor of awakening, that factor of investigation of Dharma. So when you do this, actually, it is really quite powerful, like to stay with the breathing and track it through mindfully with investigation. With investigation, you're seeing it with clear comprehension. And you can ask yourself, is this long or short? That kind of asking is more of a non-discursive inquiry. So that's pretty good. Then one's told to bring the whole body into mind. Now there's a bit of disagreement about what this actually means, but I trust Analayo's interpretation or impression. And because he's read a number of suttas and different translations and compared from the different places, like the Chinese versions and the Tibetan versions and the Pali versions and so on. His view is that one brings one's body to the fore, like mindfulness of one's body, just as I asked you to in that meditation. So you're becoming aware of your body. You're putting the focus on mindfulness of breath. Well, you're not focusing on mindfulness of breath, but you're more putting it in the background, kind of running along the back. So you become aware of your body, then you relax. Beautiful. You're relaxing. Breathing in, breathing out, relaxing. Breathing in long, breathing out long. Breathing in, one trains calming bodily activities, I shall breathe in. One trains calming bodily activities, I shall breathe out. What that means is relaxing. Relaxing your body. And I didn't ask you how you felt with that, but it's pretty nice, isn't it? It's pretty pleasant. When we have, if you remember, I mentioned in the talk last night, one of the things that encouraged neurological neuroplasticity and also neural pathway growth. I was referring to this in terms of referring to how we cultivate something. Well, neurologically, if something's pleasant, it will encourage us to stick to that. Like the more something is pleasant, it's one of the factors in neuroplasticity, whether it's pleasant or not. So if we do an activity and it's pleasant, it's reinforcing to keep doing it, and so it strengthens that pathway. So when we have some sort of pleasure, and unworldly pleasure I'm talking about, the pleasure of relaxing, for example, that can lead to the cultivation of joy. So then we move into the second tetrad. The second tetrad, which has 4 steps again. One trains experiencing joy, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing joy, I shall breathe out. And you can experience joy in lots of different ways. Sometimes we're just not aware of it. But if you tune in to be aware of it, even if it's just a little bit, the more you become aware of it, the more you focus on it, the stronger it grows. This is a principle that we talked a little bit about last night when I was talking about tranquility meditation. The fact that when this is, that is, remember that's the principles of dependent arising. When there is unworldly pleasure, it can give rise to unworldly joy. When I say unworldly, I mean not of the world, not being caught up in creating more suffering, not stimulating craving and grasping and clinging, but being along the path to liberation. This is joy arising from concentration. So it can arise from concentration. It can arise from just recognizing you're in the moment. It can arise from recognizing that you've put aside the hindrances for a little bit. It can arise by just thinking of a wholesome deed you've done. Just joy has many ways of arising. And what we're talking about here is using mindfulness of breath. It's in the background now. You're experiencing joy. You nourish it. You nurture it. Experiencing joy, one trains it. Then joy, and I think I mentioned last night also, happiness is one of those. Happiness is mentioned as one of the 5 factors of jhana factors. Happiness is a more refined experience than joy. Joy is kind of bubbly and energetic, and you you feel alive and up. There's some upward movement with joy. With happiness, there's more of a sense of contentment. And in the instructions that I heard from Analio, he would say something like, well, even if you can't experience any joy, it's quite easy to experience happiness. It's just a reflection of your, it's just a reflection on contentment with things. Gratitude, for example. Technically, that's more associated with joy, but, when you can be content, when you can recognize things that you can be happy about, you can feel happiness. I feel happiness in my heart. I feel joy in my through my whole body, but I can feel, if there's a place for it in my body for happiness, it's in my heart. It's kind of a lightness there. And all I have to do is I can find that happiness through, noticing pleasure, unworldly pleasure, then noticing joy arise, and then being with the joy. Joy will transform into a more subtle experience of happiness, which is it's light-hearted happiness. It's lovely. So, experiencing joy, I shall breathe out, in, and so on. Experiencing happiness, I breathe in and out. Then, what happens is one is invited to put joy, happiness, mindfulness of breath into the background. Again, just like we did with mindfulness of breathing in the first tetrad, and we brought body to the fore. What we do now is, with that support of joy and happiness, which gives rise to it's one of those two factors of jhana. Not that you're experiencing jhanas, but your mind is more concentrated and you're more resilient and capable of seeing things and knowing things. That's just a lawnmower in the background. I'm in an urban place. My neighbour's kindly mowing out the back. Oh, so be it. That's the way it goes. We establish seclusion, and then whatever arises, we work with it. Okay, so happiness arises. What we do, we put happiness and joy in the background, and it gives us the resources to bring mental activity to mind. Some of you may have done a meditation with me called Settling the Mind in its Natural State, which I learned from Alan Wallace. And the way I understand this particular step is like practicing that meditation practice. Settling the mind in its natural state, you bring attention to mental objects. Things are just, you put mental objects as the object of your meditation. And you're neither feeding into them, nor are you resisting them. You're not chasing them. You're not being seduced by the pleasant ones, and you're not denying and resisting the unpleasant. You're just allowing them to arise and pass away. So one trains experiencing mental activity, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing mental activity, I shall breathe out. That's it. So it's pretty cool. You sit and watch. You watch the show. I've got a few tracks that I did for adolescents many years ago based on this, and I call it sitting back and watching the show. Just watching the mind do its stuff, play its games and all the rest of it. Your task is not to get entangled in it. So this is a pretty cool meditation. I did months of this when I was on a retreat with Alan Wallace. It was a number of shamatha practices, but I did a lot of settling the mind in its natural state. I see this as that practice. Settling the mind in its natural state, the way I learned it, has been compared to like lots of mental activity, and you let things kind of untangle by themselves. The more you don't feed into a thinking or resist thinking or mental objects, that can include the mental activity associated with emotions and other things. The more you don't resist things like that, the more you don't struggle with things like mental phenomena, the more you don't feed into it, either with resistance or being seduced by it, it tends to settle down. It's settling the mind in its natural state. That's what that practice does. So the next step on in this tetrad, which is focusing on Vedana, calming mental activity. One trains calming mental activity, I shall breathe in. One trains calming mental activity, I shall breathe out. And it's literally like when we relax. You know how when you relax, you're letting go of muscle tension. With this one, you're letting go of mental tension. You can see the activity, and there's a kind of a mental tension or an excitement or something. You just kind of let it go. You just let it drop. You just let it drop into the earth, if you want. Sort of fade away, just come and go. You're not chasing it. So it actually calms down. So this particular tetrad, if we go back to our that table, we're looking at the factors of, the 7 factors of awakening. You probably can't see it there. 7 factors of awakening. The first tetrad is very much about mindfulness, investigations of Dharma and energy. It takes a lot of energy to put body in the fore and mindfulness of breath in the background. This second tetrad, these 4 steps in the second tetrad related to joy, happiness, seeing mental activity, then calming mental activities, is very much related to the 4th factor of awakening, being joy, and tranquility as the 5th factor of awakening. So what we've done is we've relaxed our body, and now we're calming our mind, which is the way we can describe tranquility. Calm body. In Pali it's called passaddhi, and it refers to a calm body and a sort of relaxed body and a calm mind. Tranquil. Serenity. So the next tetrad, gets really interesting. The next tetrad is related to, on the 7 factors of awakening, is related to, mostly related to concentration, the 6th of the 7 factors, and equipoise as the 7th. So, when you have a calm mind, it's like, when the mind's being really active, it's like we're caught up in it. It's like the surface level of the ocean, for example, or a lake being buffeted by winds. There may be a lake and it's buffeted by winds. We're at the surface level when we're caught up in thinking. So what we do is we calm that thinking down, and it's like we go deeper and deeper into our mind, so to speak. It's like the mind the knowing quality of the mind becomes more obvious. So, rather than caught up in all the thoughts, we start to go deeper and deeper into the knowing. And that's quite peaceful and calm and clear and still. So that's what we do with this next step, which is the first step of the mind component of these tetrads, of these 16 steps. Experiencing mind, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing mind, I shall breathe out. So you become familiar with your mind. It's like, in some respects, it's like what I learned with a meditation called awareness of awareness. Settling back in awareness rather than getting caught up in all the activities, the mental activities. You're sitting back in a sense of knowing. It's like doing a U-turn with our consciousness rather than going out there and being conscious of trees and lawnmowers and airplane flights and dogs barking and all this sort of stuff. We're doing a U-turn with our attention, and we're coming back to rest with our heart-mind, the knowing. That's really cool. That's a whole meditation practice in and of itself. Then, when one realizes that, there's something called gladdening the mind. It's a really profound experience. Now, I want to be clear on this word gladdening. Gladdening is usually used in reference to what comes before joy in serenity meditations or tranquility meditations. One has a sort of a gladdening of the mind. It's like this pleasure, unworldly pleasure, and then that leads to joy. That's the way it's usually understood in serenity meditation language. In this case, however, there's a word that goes, there's a term that goes before the, I don't know the Pali term for gladdening, but it's called, there's a term that goes abhi before it. Abhi means superior and advanced. So it's a much more advanced experience of gladdening. So here, having experienced being with the knowing, there's a wonderful gladdening, and it's much deeper than joy and happiness. It is this deep satisfaction and deep contentment with what's happening. It's a really, I think it's a really deep spiritual experience, really gladdening the mind. One is so content and one feels very satisfied. I know that, it's not ultimately satisfying. I know it's dukkha, but still, it's a wonderful experience to have. So when we have that, then we're ready to drop into unified attention, drop into a samadhi. A samadhi meaning our mind is collected, our mental energies are going in the one direction. And technically we could sort of drop into an absorption into that state and kind of let go into that state, dropping into a state of samadhi. And so this is the third step of this, the third tetrad. In other words, it is, what tetrad? The third step, concentrating the mind, breathing in and out, is the 11th step of the 16 steps. So we're going into samadhi, and we're using all the benefits of samadhi for what they are. Samadhi is muscle. Samadhi gives us power. Samadhi gives us clarity, and in this case, we drop into that, and we can stay there as long as we want, if we're able. I mean, it takes a lot to develop the samadhi of jhanas, but for many people it may be possible. So whatever level you have, it's kind of enjoying and being in that state of a concentrated mind, where one's mental energies are all unified and going in the one direction. And it's very, very peaceful, very calm, quiet. So that's the one trains concentrating the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains concentrating the mind, I shall breathe out. The next one is liberating the mind, I breathe in. One trains liberating the mind, I shall breathe out. So you can either some people would say you need to come out of samadhi to do this, because samadhi you're not really in deep samadhi or deep jhana, for example, or an absorption state. You're not really analysing anything. You're just abiding in that state. But that state gives you the power to look clearly and see clearly into something. So in many respects, it's like you emerge from that state of absorption. Then you apply the power of that focus, that state, to discern experience. And here what we're doing, therefore we've gone through a lot of the tranquility components, cultivating joy, relaxing the body, cultivating tranquility, experiencing a quietening of the mind, a stilling of the mind, experiencing concentration. That's all related to these tranquility aspects of meditation. Then we use that to develop insight. So what we do is we look closely into what does it mean to liberate the mind. And there's a lot about that, but one way we can think about it is letting go of one of the fetters to awakening, which is something called mana, or self-conceit. the idea that we are our egos, that we cling on to our egos as something lasting and fulfilling and satisfying and permanent and all the rest of it, and we identify with it. It's about seeing that for what it is. And when we can let go of the burden of the ego, or let go of the burden of self-conceiting, it is enormously liberating. So this is what Analia talks about as one of the ways we can experience liberating the mind. Okay, so it's not complete liberation, but it's pretty nice. It's on that path, and it's a definite experience. Whenever I can let go of my ego tendencies, it's such a relief. It's such a relief. So liberating the mind, I breathe in. Liberating the mind, I breathe out. So we're coming up to the fourth tetrad now. And if we go back to that table, this is all about awakening. And if we go back to the table, it's more about the seven factors as well. It's not more about the seven factors, but yes, the seven factors are primarily brought into this one. So there are four steps, and it goes like this. One trains, contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe in. One trains, contemplating impermanence, I breathe out. Now we're clearly into the insight aspect of meditation here. We're looking with the power of our concentrated mind that we've developed, and we're just seeing the way things are. Things are impermanent. And we can see the impermanence of our breath, or we can see the impermanence of our egos, or we can see the impermanence of life. We can see when I practice this, sometimes I look at the impermanence of what I call myself. Like there's something called five khandha: form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And I might just focus on these are five aggregates that usually refer to a self. We tend to cling to these aggregates as being who and what I am. But if we can start to break it up and we start to see the impermanence in one of the khandha, for example, one of the five aggregates, it's really quite insightful. So one trains contemplating impermanence. Then when we see impermanence, there's a natural kind of disenchantment, a natural dispassion with experience. We usually cling on to this idea of self, for example, as lasting, and I'm MalHuxter, I'm a clinical psychologist, or I'm a meditation teacher, I am. I mean, we clearly see the futility of that, the futility of clinging on to a self that's somebody. I am a somebody. I want to be somebody. I'm a somebody. I mean, that's so futile. There's so much suffering associated with that. We develop a dispassion for that type of ego consolidation, ego grasping, that self-conceit. So we have dispassion. Dispassion means letting go. I mean, you can think about something else here. You can think about food, for example. When you see the impermanence of that beautiful chocolate cake, you really pay attention to the impermanence of it. The impermanence of chocolate cakes. And you see it clearly. It's there and then it's not. It's there and then it's not. You develop dispassion for chocolate cakes. You're not spending your whole days and nights craving chocolate cakes. There's some dispassion. And I could talk about other senses like sexual activity, for example. When you see the impermanence of something, then it's easy to develop dispassion. Well, it's not easy, but it's with insight into impermanence, we have dispassion. So one trains contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe in. One trains contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe out. When we have dispassion, we see the arising of experience, but we're not grasping after it anymore. So we also see the passing away of experience, but when we're not grasping after it, we sort of let it pass away. We let it fade away. So this includes what we normally call ourselves, like, our egos, or the five khandha that I mentioned before, those five aggregates that we relate to as being a self. We see these arising and passing, and we start to focus on the fading away of things. If we can focus on the fading away of things, which is what happens with dispassion, then we see the cessation of things, like things fade away and they don't rise again. They're fading away. This is called dispassion. This is called cessation. And with that, it leads on to the next one. One trains letting go. I shall breathe in. One trains contemplating letting go. I shall breathe out. We literally let go. Let go. Which results in Nibbana, which results in liberation. I heard Samadhi give a talk once, and it was all about summarizing the Eightfold Path. He said, if I could summarize the Eightfold Path into 2 words, it would be letting go. Letting go. When we understand that grasping and clinging and holding on to experience is a cause of suffering, then freedom from that suffering results from letting go. So that's the final bit. They're the 16 steps. So I'll just go through them again. Step 1. Well, first we set it up. We bring mindfulness to the fore and we establish mindfulness of breathing. Then we're breathing in and out. We investigate. We use inquiry. Breathing in and out short. We investigate. Then the third step is experiencing the whole body, breathing in and out. We experience the whole body, like we brought body to mind. The 4th step is calming bodily activity. We breathing in and out. And we have a feeling tone, like we start to notice the pleasure of this. I think I might have mentioned that, but you can enjoy it. It's quite nice, isn't it? I'm seeing some of you nod. It's quite nice to be able to relax. There's a lovely, pleasant feeling about that. So the 5th step, experiencing joy, breathing in and out. 6th step, experiencing happiness, breathing in and out. 7th step, experiencing mental activity, breathing in and out. 8th step, calming mental activity, breathing in and out, with tranquility of mind. 9th step, experiencing the mind, or heart mind, or chitta, breathing in and out. 10th, gladdening the mind, breathing in and out. 11th, concentrating the mind, breathing in and out, with concentration. 12th step, liberating the mind and breathing in and out. And this last step is related to equipoise. The 11th step is related to concentration. Then the 13th step, contemplating impermanence, breathing in and out. And depending on independence on breathing in and out, independence on seclusion. Seclusion, again, is no hindrances, being free from the hindrances. But when we are free from the hindrances, we can see things more clearly. So we see impermanence. Contemplating, the 14th step is contemplating dispassion, breathing in and out. 5th step, contemplating cessation, breathing in and out. 16th step is contemplating letting go, breathing in and out, culminating in letting go, culminating in deliverance, culminating in awakening, culminating in the freedom of Nibbana. Okay, so I think, I hope I've given you an overview of the Satipatthana Sutta, not the Satipatthana Sutta, the Anapanasati Sutta. And I hope that it's been helpful. And we'll do more on this as we go through the retreat. So let's have a few moments silence, just as we reflect on the Dharma talk.